Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot Kid, a podcast for examining the non-Star Wars work of Star Wars creators. I'm John.
I'm Mike.
And we are here to guide you through this week's episode, where we will be taking a look at the first films of the first three directors of Star Wars movies, of any Star Wars movies that ever came into existence: George Lucas, Irvin Kershner, and Richard Marquand. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. And that brings us to the work of George Lucas, first Star Wars director, making the original film, of course, in 1977. And his first film, THX 1138, based on his student film, THX 1138 4EB Electronic Labyrinth. And Mike, do you want to give the audience an idea of what THX 1138 is?
I can try. It's a sort of Orwellian future in which people are treated like numbers and interchangeable parts, and they're all working to serve the man, and they're all, heavily medicated and heavily programmed to do the man's bidding. And one of them, or two of them, I guess, decide that maybe this isn't the way it should be, and they try to become individuals and try to break away from the conformity of society, and hijinks ensue.
Yeah, hijinks do ensue. It's an interesting film. It's definitely a first film. And it is a film where, once again, Lucas has erased the past, and you can only find the George Lucas director's cut now, which has latter-day CG effects inserted into it.
I don't think that's true. I think you
Really?
can get the original theatrical on iTunes. I'm not 100% positive, but they've got the George Lucas director's cut, but then there's a second section where it's not labeled the director's cut, and it's not in HD, but I think it might be the theatrical cut.
I would be fascinated to revisit the theatrical cut, because that is the one that many, many years ago, being the Star Wars fanboy that I am, I rented. It had layers of dust on it, and my friend and I rented it, and we said, this is George Lucas's first movie. We got to see this. We fell asleep and had to return the video, and then we tried again, and we fell asleep, and we returned the video. And on the third time I made it through. Have you ever seen the original cut?
Yeah, I think that we have all had that same exact experience that you had.
Yeah.
My similar experience occurred with my friend Zach, who's also a huge Star Wars fan, and I think he had already seen the movie. And, of course, I wanted to check it out because it's George Lucas. And, yeah, I pretty much fell asleep and had kind of, sworn that off until the director's cut was released in 2004, and it was released in theaters. Like I remember going to see it at River East, and at that point it's like, oh, well, George Lucas is making a director's cut and they're releasing it in theaters. How are you not going to see that? Even if, I did dislike the movie greatly 8 years earlier. So, of course, I went to see the director's cut, and this time watching it as an adult, I appreciated it a lot more.
It is definitely a function of age. It's a very dry film. It's not terribly accessible, but at the same time, it's, if you can plug into the more abstract style that it is in, and the fact that it really is Lucas working on, all of the things that he would come to be known for. The quick cuts, the camera setups, those sorts of things. And at the same time, I've got to ask, did you think that the George Lucas director's cut was any sort of improvement on the film?
I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that because my memory of the theatrical cut was such that I don't, there's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, this must have been, new, but I mean, obviously because it's CGI, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
like non CGI things where I'm like, this must not have been in the original, right? And I have absolutely no idea what the changes are, on a shot by shot, scene by scene basis. But I do think that it is improved in some ways based on just seeing sort of like what was added. It feels like some of these things sort of helped in terms of clarity, but
Yes.
I mean, it suffered, I think, from the same problem that a lot of people have with the Star Wars special editions, where aesthetically speaking, it's like a car crash. It's like, remember when that guy gets in that car and then he starts driving it and immediately crashes into that pole? That's what it feels like when the two aesthetics of the micro budget 1974 sci-fi movie and the super duper ILM produced special edition CGI effects clash. It's just like that car and that pole.
See,
But
I don't quite plug into that. I do agree with you that the CG stuff is very, like, it does not blend particularly well. There are a couple of shots where it is as successful as it could be. Let's put it that way. It's as successful as it could be. But there's other stuff specifically if you're going to talk about, the cars during the chase, there are certain things that were put in, like added scaffolding and workers. And when he's climbing out through the shell, the creatures that attacked him originally were just little people in white suits. And they get replaced with these CG monkeys because, he that's what he wanted back then but couldn't have. And those, I think, are really the ones where it's most jarring because it's, there is, in his own words, no movie is ever completed, it's abandoned. And sometimes it's okay to abandon it. But I will say that the trade-off is that there are certain points in the original version where he definitely does address some narrative problems, visual narrative problems with what's happening, on screen. One of the things that I wish he had not addressed was in the beginning when THX is watching the holo TV.
Oh, yeah.
And the machine comes down while he's watching the naked woman dance. The visual language was clear enough for me the first time. I didn't need to see the machine come down to participate. It was sort of like,
I have to say I appreciate that because, I mean, it really does. I mean, that's something where it adds to, the content, I think, where it's really sort of like hitting home the point that he's trying to make, which is like even this bodily function is being, sort of like controlled by the state. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true.
I mean, that to me, I think is a perfectly valid addition, and it doesn't take me out of the movie or anything like that.
It doesn't take me out of the movie, but it is something, I don't know. I was just sort of like, I got the point the first time around, guys. I don't have to, it's just, that's just me. What can I say? They did tweak the hologram effects too, in that part, for certain. But the hologram aesthetic you see crop back up in Star Wars.
Yeah, which they maintain throughout all the different incarnations of Star Wars, which I think is really cool. I mean, the problem that I have with the special editions in this particular case is that this movie in particular was definitely tailor-made to its budget and its limitations, and to sort of abandon those because now you don't have the limitations, and it's 30 years later or whatever, I think is a problem, and it really does take you out of the movie, and it really sort of bums me out because they do such a good job of making this epic science fiction movie for no money. I mean, you see this a lot with the filmmakers. I mean, you don't see this a lot, I guess, but there are numerous examples of this, and every time that I see it, where I see like a first-time filmmaker who's like, I have no money, I want to make a science fiction movie, and they make something with the materials at their disposal, it usually ends up being really, really great because they really have to, use their creativity in order to accomplish it. And I think that's the biggest achievement of THX 1138. And it's, I think, really kind of what puts Lucas on the map. And the other thing which I just kind of, think about whenever I watch this movie is how it's really basically an experimental film. And how you hear Lucas talk about how, now he wants to just make art house films that no one will ever see and whatever, this is what he's talking about. And you see him doing it here, and you see how not Hollywood this is, how outside of the box, and how experimental, and how not in the typical narrative tradition this movie is. And you're like, wow, he did a really good job at that. Then he became like the absolute master of the Hollywood style narrative filmmaking, whatever.
Well, Hollywood sought to imitate him. He became the new template. It's not that he didn't change himself so much as Hollywood changed to match him.
I mean, to me, I think maybe he was, doing sort of like a slight variation of that template, and he ended up creating the new norm or whatever. But regardless of that, whether you look at Indiana Jones or Star Wars or anything, even like Red Tails, it's, that perfect narrative, and he does that better than anyone, right? But he does this really well too. And I really, really wish that he would go back and do something not like THX 1138, but something like it in the sense that it's not like anything else you've seen.
What's interesting, I think, about THX is one of the things that Lucas said that served as an impetus for Star Wars being born was that at the end of THX, he had an ending and it was done, basically. And he said he always regretted that he boxed himself in. He could never go back to the world of THX because there was nothing else to tell, which I guess I agree with in a sense because he's saying his character made it to the end. There was nowhere to go with that.
Like that to me,
I would believe that he has changed his mind over time as to what the limitations of that ending might have been.
Perhaps,
but the way he felt was that he was done.
Okay, I mean that's fine. But for him to regret that, it's like, I regret that I had a perfect ending. Which is something which is, generally speaking, a positive quality in a movie,
Yeah.
I mean, I wish that I could make more of these things, but I can't because I said everything that there is to say about it here. I mean, it's like, no. You don't.
Well, I actually think, though, that there is a lot, because, of course, we're looking at the works of Star Wars creators outside of Star Wars to see, what they tell us about how they made things. There are definitely things carried forward from THX into Star Wars that never got acknowledged as such. And one of my favorite things is that THX opens up with, basically like a Flash Gordon, like it opens with an old serial thing to give you an idea of the type of world a dystopic version he's creating. He has the tribute at the beginning of THX with a film clip of the movies he grew up watching that influenced this. And then when you jump forward to Star Wars, 20th Century Fox wasn't using the fanfare anymore. He specifically carries over the fanfare. It wasn't recorded by Williams for the 1977 release. They literally lifted it and put it in front of the film in a similar sort of callback. So that whole idea of callback, even though THX is its own thing, it still has that built into it. I think that's so interesting to see that come forward, when Star Wars comes around.
Yeah, and that clip at the beginning, I think, is kind of like a really interesting sort of like clash and commentary on movies and Hollywood and everything like that. Because the way that it's designed, it actually comes before the Warner Brothers logo. So in a way, it's kind of mimicking the experience. It's like the original Grindhouse, where it's like you're seeing
Yeah.
the short before the movie, just like you used to, and it's like, all right, and now we're going to watch some typical Hollywood fare, and then you see this thing which is unlike anything you've ever seen before. You see this art film, and I think that that's really sort of like cool and subversive, and it works really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of clips, one of my favorite things to cite is that one of my favorite albums through my younger years was Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails.
Oh yeah,
And that actually
that's great.
opens with a THX 1138 clip, the one of the cop beating the guy that he's watching.
Oh.
That goes and it starts, and then it speeds up and it goes into Mr. Self-Destruct, the first clip. So Trent Reznor had a THX callback in a 1994 album, and nobody saw it. Nobody knew. It just snuck in there.
I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about from that album, and
Yeah.
I had no idea.
The first time I
Wow.
put it together was I was already a Nails fan by the time I watched THX. And that scene came up, and I went, you got to be kidding me. Like, I heard it. I immediately heard it, and I went back and I compared the clips, and I did some research. I was like, wow. Like, that was a mind-blowing moment, because it was literally, for me, like chocolate and peanut butter being put together. I got George Lucas, I got Trent Reznor. Something came together that intersected. I was, wow, that's fantastic. It's a wonderful moment in my youth, Mike.
One thing that I just want to note before we move on is that this movie was co-written and sound designed by Walter Murch, who was, Lucas's friend from back in the day. They worked together on Gimme Shelter, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Walter Murch, he did the sound for the next movie, American Graffiti, which was fantastic. And then he became an editor, edited a million movies, including The Conversation and, Apocalypse Now and The English Patient and all these things. Walter Murch would later go on to write what is considered to be sort of like the textbook for film editing. They use in film school, to this day. It's called Blink of an Eye, I think. And he also, there's this amazing book which was written by the guy who wrote the novel The English Patient, called The Conversations, Walter Murch and the Art of Editing, which is just the guy Michael Ondaatje, is that his name? The guy who wrote The English Patient, that guy and Walter Murch just talking about Murch's career.
I think I have something to put on my Amazon wish list.
I am not exaggerating when I say it is the absolute best book on film theory that I've ever read. And I think that as great of an editor and as great of a sound designer, and hey, also Walter Murch, Star Wars guy, he directed an episode of the Clone Wars. As great as Walter Murch is at all of those things, I think he is the best at film theory, and I think that he is one of, if not the best film theorist in the world.
So would it be fair to say that Lucas's collaboration with him here has an influence going forward?
I think so. I think it has an influence going forward, on the world. Yeah, I mean, these guys, I think, the two of them were trying to figure stuff out together, but, I think you see a lot of, the sound design here is very rich. It's kind of like, almost like a wall of sound sort of thing. And they definitely take that into American Graffiti. And
absolutely. And actually, if you're talking about the sound design, one of the limitations was the size of the cast, and that's one of the things that they tweaked in the special edition was when they emerge from their abstract prison into the big flow of people. The way that they turned 10 men into 100 was with that wall of sound theory, like to convey the disorientation that THX went through, even though they had 20 extras walking by.
Yeah,
but you still got the point of what was going on at the time. Certainly, yeah. It's tough. I mean, just before we move on, would you recommend THX as a film to watch for, so like, would you say to somebody, yeah, you know what, if you have the time, go ahead and sit down with it? Or do you think that it is something where it's more beneficial to watch a behind the scenes sort of thing and just learn about its influence and shaping?
No, I think it's a very good movie. You know, I think that it might be a little rough around the edges and it might have some pacing issues, but I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in it, both from a filmmaking standpoint and also from, you know, a George Lucas, you know, standpoint, but also just from a thematic standpoint, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the commentary which Lucas is making here is deep, and he goes to some dark places and really sort of puts a microscope on society and consumerism and all that stuff. And it's not a pretty picture, you know, and it's great. Yeah, I think it's a really good movie.
I think it's worth watching, even if you wind up not, because I did see a screening of it just a few months ago, and the audience was decidedly split on its reaction to it. But I think that it's worth watching simply, even if you don't like it, it's worth watching because a lot of the thematic beats that are in this come back in The Phantom Menace very much in terms of the world building. He very much lifts elements from this and puts it into the Star Wars universe and says, okay, I can reuse this now. So, you know, and those carry through. But that's THX. That brings us to the second director of the original trilogy, Irvin Kershner, legendary director Irvin Kershner. With Empire Strikes Back, became arguably everybody's favorite Star Wars director. And his first film was Stakeout on Dope Street, a 1958 Warner production. So, Mike, what you want to tell everybody what Stakeout on Dope Street is about?
Yeah, basically, you know, on the rough streets of, I don't even know what city it's supposed to be. Is it L.A. or San Francisco? I forget.
Somewhere.
You know, there's people selling dope, and they're poisoning the youth of America, and there's some people who are trying to make a deal for, you know, like 2 pounds of uncut heroin, and basically the deal goes bad, and the drug dealers who are involved in this end up, you know, getting killed or end up killing some cops, and the dope is out in the open. And this group of friends who, you know, generally speaking are some good guys, but, you know, they're struggling just like everyone else. They are the ones who come across the dope, and now the question is, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to sell it and get rich? Are they going to turn it into the police? And it kind of just goes from there, and we see what happens based on the choices that they make.
Yeah. It's fair to say that this was Warner maybe doing sort of a PSA at the time about drug culture.
Yeah, I think that is safe to say. Apparently, Roger Corman was an uncredited producer on this, and you know, it was definitely, you know, in the, I mean, I'm not going to say to this extreme, but sort of like the reefer madness style of, you know, like, you know, don't do drugs, kids, and also, you know, like, if you know, this problem goes way beyond just doing drugs. It, you know, it affects everyone. You know, people die because of this stuff. People die because they're trying to sell this stuff. It's kind of like, you know, traffic. You know, 50 years before its time.
Yeah, it's yes, of course. It's like traffic. Yes, yes. Yeah, Soderbergh. All right, already.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, I think worth pointing out is that the director of photography, although the name credited is Mark Jeffrey, it's actually Haskell Wexler, who is something of a legendary cinematographer, which is pretty amazing.
And it's his first movie, if I'm not mistaken, that he photographed.
Oh, I didn't know this was his first. Wow, that's amazing.
And he would go on to photograph American Graffiti for Lucas. and a billion other things. And
Yeah.
like with American Graffiti, I think he's like credited as like visual consultant or something like that. But
Yeah.
he's actually, it was like a weird thing where they like hired someone, but then they got fired. But the credits, but he's basically the guy who shot American Graffiti. But he's done a lot of stuff. And by the way, there's a documentary about him called "Tell Them Who You Are," which
Hmm.
was directed by his son. And basically his son was a filmmaker of his own, right, a documentarian, or trying to become one. And Haskell Wexler, not the easiest person to get along with. And this movie is basically, what it's about is this kid trying desperately to get his father's approval,
Yeah.
whether it's professionally or in as a son or whatever, because like the two were vastly different in terms of their personalities and everything. And it's a really, really beautiful movie about a father and a son, and it really gives you a lot of insight into who Haskell Wexler was as a person, and
Wow.
why his work is so significant, even if he was a really big jerk. So,
You
yeah,
know, some great artists have had personality issues.
yep,
The artistic temperament is not one always that is easy to get along with, for sure.
for sure.
But Kershner at play in this film as director and co-writer of the screenplay and story. I was pretty amazed because I was ready to sit down. I've seen these types of movies before. You've seen these types of everybody in the audience, you have seen this type of movie or clips from it where everybody has a good laugh at the way they portrayed, drugs back in the 50s, and we're trying to scare kids and stuff like that. But this is actually pretty well put together. I was like, oh, so this is what it looks like when talent's behind the camera. No kidding.
Yeah, it's really good. It was like one of those things where, like, I don't know, like I became obsessed with Irvin Kershner, like in college. I tried to seek out all of his movies, and this is one which had never been released. Like, you couldn't get it anywhere.
Oh,
And
wow.
like I had a teacher in film school who I really sort of bonded with. I think because he's like, "What's your favorite movie?" And I'm like, "Empire Strikes Back." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I like that one. That one was directed by Irvin Kershner." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, high five." And he's like, "Yeah, he made this amazing movie called Stakeout on Dope Street." I'm like, "Yeah, I've been trying." And then he had seen it as like a kid, like on WGN here in Chicago or whatever, and he was like telling me about this movie, and I had sort of like envisioned it in my head. And then one day it popped up on Netflix, and I finally got to see it, and it kind of blew me away.
Yeah.
It's available now. You can rent it on Google Play, or you can also, they just released it in widescreen on the Warner Archive, so you can get it from there. I highly recommend it. I think it's a
Yeah.
really solid sort of
I
crime
completely
movie.
agree. And the thing is, you can actually see composition and camera movement that you can see in Empire Strikes Back. Like, obviously, this is a first film, and so it's very, he hasn't found everything about his style yet. But there are certain scenes that he composed. First and foremost, like the first thing was, I'm used to seeing these old 50s movies. Like, this one was actually using depth of field and like had this, wonderful dynamic setup where like somebody would be in the background reacting to what the two people in the middle ground were talking about. And it was amazing. And then even the way that the scene plays where the dope addict is talking about what it's like to be an addict. And it's basically, the cautionary tale to the kid about how many times he's had to kick it, and he's in the prison, and you see him going through withdrawal and all of those sorts of things. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And there was even some interplay with the way he staged the girlfriend and the reticent male lead who didn't really, the artist who didn't really want to get into things but went along with his friends. There are scenes that they have where I was like, yeah, okay. Well, like the way that they're facing each other and like everything is like it's Han and Leia in the hallway. You can sort of see that echo in that moment. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, of these three movies, these three first films, Kershner is the one who had the most prolific career in between his first movie and his Star Wars movie. He's the one who had he was working for a couple decades. Whereas like Lucas had made one movie in between, and Marquand, who we're going to get to in a minute, had made like one or two. So definitely his style evolved over time as technology and evolved over time and everything like that. But like you're saying, there are still the seeds of that later on. And more than anything, I mean, you see his immense talent, and one of the things about Kershner, and one of the reasons why I think he's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, is because he lets the material dictate his style. In a sense, he doesn't have like these like very, very specific trademarks like you can see even in Lucas's movies. He is very sort of malleable when it comes to how to tell these stories, and he does whatever is best for the movie. So that's it's really good. Definitely seek it out and watch it. It's good.
Yeah, it's surprisingly worthwhile to watch this cautionary tale of what happens when kids get involved with dope.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the first film of Richard Marquand, the director of Return of the Jedi, the original punching bag of the Star Wars films before the prequels came out. People love to rag on aspects of Return of the Jedi, unfairly, I might add. But his first film was a film called The Legacy, with, of all people, Sam Elliott as one of the leads. And this one is definitely a bit different. Mike, why don't you give everybody an idea of what this 1978 gem is all about?
Well, Catherine Ross and Sam Elliott are two people. I don't know if they even specify what the work is that they do. I think they're artists.
Interior design. I think they're hired for interior
designers.
design.
Yeah. So someone gives them a $50,000 retainer to go to the UK to do something which they don't know what. They literally do not know what it is they're supposed to do. So they decide to go early and make it sort of a nice vacation. And they get into a motorcycle accident and get picked up by a nice rich guy in his Rolls Royce who takes them to his castle and lets them rest while their bike is being repaired. And all of these other random people start showing up, apparently invited to this castle. And then people start dying, and they seem to be dying in a rather supernatural way. And it becomes clear that this was no accident that Catherine Ross and Sam Elliott were brought to this castle, and maybe they're involved in a way that they're not even aware of yet.
Yeah. That's a good synopsis of this. Your synopsis makes a little more sense than various aspects of the movie itself, I will say.
I get the impression that you didn't like this movie.
There are some narrative hiccups with this movie. I was not a big fan. This the most similar sort of experience I can relate is I got excited months and months ago. They finally released, and they made a big deal of it being released, that the version of Dracula done by the guy who later did Dark Shadows, starring Jack Palance, or Palance, depending, of all people, as Dracula, and said, but this is the guy who did Dark Shadows. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. My reaction to The Legacy is similar, where I watched The Legacy and said, well then, this didn't go quite the way it could have. This is a really disjointed movie. I mean, it's supposed to be a horror movie. The motives are never clearly communicated. It plays like a movie that they were sort of writing while they were shooting. Like it's a jumble, and it doesn't ever come together. And I think that the best example of it not coming together is when they're trying to escape the estate, when they hijack the Rolls Royce and they find out that like all roads lead back to this, this castle, this manor, whatever it is. The music that's playing is so ridiculously inappropriate for a tense scene where people are trying to escape this black magic castle, and get away with their lives. It's like this zippy 1970s chase. Like this very much feels like a movie where, hey, it's your first time, kid. Just see what you can do with this. We've had this script laying around. See what you can do with it. And I didn't like it at all.
Yeah, I definitely liked it more than you did. I thought it was pretty good, actually, because, I don't know, it seemed like it was doing that thing that horror movies try to do, to be spooky and have like sort of like a haunted house, witchcraft, whatever. And usually whenever they start that, I just completely check out, because usually it becomes about sort of like the suspense of what is going to happen. And here I really felt that it was more interactive, I guess, as a viewer, where, you were trying to figure out what was happening, what was the cause of this, but it wasn't just like, I'm walking down a corridor, what's going to jump out at me now? It's more like something happens and now we need to figure out why that thing happened, and it was almost more of a drama than it was, straight up horror, just with like these weird supernatural elements. And I think that all worked pretty well. I thought it was pretty well constructed, and you're right about some of the tonal issues being weird, but I wonder how much of that was just playing on, expectations. Like when the movie starts, I'm like, okay, the box art has like a cat with two different colored eyes and a weird old hand with a ring on it, and it's like the legacy. And then the movie starts up and there's this like strange love song that reminds me of like the theme from Octopussy, and it's got like like 70s romance style font, as like Catherine Ross and Sam Elliott are like riding their motorcycle through the English countryside or whatever, and it's just like okay, wait a minute, I thought this was a horror movie, no? And then it kind of got into the horror stuff gradually, and I think that it worked. I mean, one of the things which really struck me about it, and I guess this is just a reaction to what we see today, is I'm like, these people are all like adults. Most horror movies you see today it's like all teenagers or college kids. It's like an adult movie, but horror.
I'm going to say I feel the need to say that British horror, I guess, just doesn't work for me typically, because I'll cite another movie you and I watched on another show we've done, Legend of Hell House,
yes.
Which I think is more successful than this one, but still had some issues that it just wasn't successful. I mean, like, the ending of this is ridiculously upbeat for everything that has just happened. Okay, I don't know if we want to risk spoiler territory here.
Like to me, it was it ridiculously upbeat, or was it just like, this is so freaking weird? Like to me, the ending of it reminded me of the ending of Rosemary's Baby.
I have never seen Rosemary's Baby.
That's freaking weirder than anything in the Legacy. I have to tell.
I have read the riot act for this, especially since I'm a horror fan.
Yeah, like Rosemary's Baby is a legit scary movie, and it's terrifying because everything in that movie is treated so matter of factly. It's like I mean, maybe I just think of this because Cassavetes is in it, but it's like watching a Cassavetes movie, but with the devil.
Yeah, no, I maybe before the year is out, I will finally rent and watch Rosemary's Baby.
You should.
So I don't know.
You should have watched it for Shocktober.
I should have. I should have.
But it's
I
never
feel
too
like I
late.
failed. No, that's true.
It's never too late to watch Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, you have Roger Daltrey in this, which is, obviously stunt casting to begin with, and of course they cast him as a rock star. He is the music business in Europe. But I do want to, have a specific shout out. Maybe the reason I had trouble plugging into it is because Blofeld was in it. Now, not cool Blofeld, Donald Pleasance, but Charles Gray Blofeld from Diamonds Are Forever. And I'm sorry, I cannot see him on screen and not say, oh, wow, it's Blofeld. And there's a white cat in this, too. Come on.
There's a lot of white cats in this, There's cats all over this place.
There's only one
white
cat.
one? All right.
There's only one white cat. That's the whole catch.
She made her way around for sure, yeah.
She did. She did. Because who is the white cat? Ooh, now you have to watch The Legacy to find out.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
it's pretty obvious, though.
One of the interesting things about it, though, is that it was shot by Alan Hume.
Well, he was one of two cinematographers on this.
Yeah, I'm wondering if someone got fired or something, but
I'm thinking somebody did.
And I'm thinking it probably wasn't Alan Hume, since Alan Hume would go on to work with Richard Marquand for most of Marquand's career, including Return of the Jedi.
That's true. And what's interesting is if, continuing the Bond connection, Hume shot For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and View to a Kill.
Mm-hmm.
And Return of the Jedi. And what's interesting is in this, as well as in Return of the Jedi, I do not like the way he lights sets that are supposed to be outdoors.
Okay. All right.
And it's something that comes through also in For Your Eyes Only at the end when they switch to an indoor set that's supposed to be outdoors for the big showdown at the end. In the beginning of this in specific, like I could, if you were to say, okay, there were two directors of photography, try to pick out what is specifically Hume, I could sit down with you and I could say, I can guarantee you that's Hume, and I can guarantee you that's Hume, especially certain gauzy shots of Catherine Ross, where the visual aesthetic is very evocative of what we see later with Leia in the Ewok village.
Yeah.
Right down to her hair and her mannerisms.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that interesting.
Yeah. Should also be noted that this movie was edited by Ann Coates, who is a legend in the industry. She edited Lawrence of Arabia, and not to mention, Out of Sight and Aaron Brockovich. Lawrence of Arabia and Out of Sight are both on the Editors Guild's lists of the best edited films of all time, and she cut those movies like 30 years apart, which is insane. And she's had a very, very long and illustrious career.
And if anybody is wondering, in case they're not film buffs, but they've seen movies through the years, she also has editing credits on Masters of the Universe, the Golan Globus production, and also What About Bob, the Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss romp that is quite funny, I will say.
And 50 Shades of Grey, which is why I was like, oh my God, because like I was like, now I need to see this movie, and I watched it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not willing to go that far for it, but you're right.
The next one's directed by the guy who did Glengarry Glen Ross.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That is.
Wait
a minute. We covered one of his movies before. That's no guarantee of success.
There'll
be a lot of color saturations.
You never know.
Yeah. So okay. So we're split vote then on The Legacy. Do you think people should run out and see it and rent it? Do you think it'll give them a good thrill?
I think so. I think if you like movies like, Rosemary's Baby or Legend of Hell House or, those types of things, I think this is very much in that vein, that sort of like British adult, mystical horror. I think it works pretty well. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to put a call out to our audience. I know that we're new, but if you're listening, and if anybody out there decides to rent any of these three films and watch them, or all three of them, you can go over to thenerdparty.com/contact and look for our show, Great Shot Kid, drop us a line. Let us know what you thought. Is Mike right about the legacy, or am I right about the legacy? I think I'm right about the legacy. I would love to have a little straw poll here, see what people thought.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you do go over to the nerdparty.com, you can also check out the other shows that we have here on the network. We have a whole lot of things for you to look through. We have Nerd Nuptial. We have Filibuster. We have Aggressive Negotiations, which is a more esoteric Star Wars-focused podcast. And we also have SETI Alpha 3, which is a Star Trek-focused podcast. So go on over to nerdparty.com, drop us a line, check out the other shows, let us know what you think. And if people want to reach out to you, Mike, and let you know what they think, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K.
And if you want to find me over on Twitter, you can find me at Kessel Junkie. And I'll get back to you eventually. So, but you know what people should definitely do, so long as they're listening to Great Shot Kid, Mike?
What's that?
They should go on over and they should check out lootcrate.com/nerdparty. And you can go and you can sign up for Loot Crate, which is a really neat service. It sends you a box of geek goodies once a month. It's a subscription service. Cancel it at any time, or subscribe forever. And if you enter the code NERDPARTY at checkout, you're going to get a box of goodies, limited edition hats, mugs, T-shirts, collectibles, you name it. They have a different theme every month. So go on over to lootcrate.com/nerdparty and go ahead and enter the code NERDPARTY and get your discount. Well, Mike, it's been fun looking through these films. Tune in next time when we're going to be bringing you a commentary on the Star Wars Rebels, The Antilles Extraction, written by Gary Whitta.